Welcome to our webinar, Cybersecurity Risks When Project Managers Should Say No to Customer Requirements, hosted by the PSA Project Management Committee. Today's webinar kicks off our Project Management Appreciation Month at PSA Security Network, where all month we'll be featuring educational webinars, giveaways, and recognition opportunities for top project managers within our network. Here to introduce our presenter is Bill Bozeman.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. And by the way, all you project managers out there, I want you to know that I have the highest respect for you, and I say that not based on hearsay or some book I read. It was from practical experience when I was running my own company. When I finally got my arms around how important project management was, trust me, the project managers in my firm were elevated to the highest status. I went from breaking even on projects to quite profitable projects based on the skill set, not necessarily of my sales team or even my engineering team, but based on the skill set of the project managers. So you guys are extraordinarily important. And thank you for joining us today with the cyber program. I don't really think I need to dig into how important this is. All of you are students of the industry. It's extraordinarily important. Darnell Washington is our speaker today. Darnell is a president and CEO of Secure Experts, a cybersecurity firm providing information security consultants and assessments, training, certification, and accreditation. Darnell also serves on PSA Cybersecurity Advisory Council, and he's been great in that position, always on the calls, always adding recent great input. He was also hired by PSA to conduct our internal evaluation of our cybersecurity standards, and did a good job at that as well. So today, Darnell is going to address 4 hard areas of risk that project managers commonly encounter and how to best validate the interoperability of solutions and to ensure proper deployment. And here's the most important part. You really need to reduce your exposure for your customers and your company. And by the way, we have been preaching that to the owners of the systems integration companies. I want to stress that. We need to reduce the exposure to your customer and to your company. With that, I'm pleased to introduce Darnell Washington.
Well, thank you, everyone. We know that when we're talking about cybersecurity risk and the project from a project management approach, we know that we're kind of entering into a new phase where we're looking at who has the liability for the overall implementation of the product. And currently, as it stands, is that it currently is the systems integrator who is ultimately responsible for delivering the end user requirements to the customer, and that they need to make sure that they have provided according to whatever the scope of work or the contract is. And we wanted to talk about customer requirements for just one moment. The first thing is that when we're working with a customer, the primary areas that we need to focus on is, have we appropriately defined the customer's requirements? There are certain items that are sometimes listed in the scopes of work and in the project plans that are created by the writers of the statements of work and the performance breakdown summaries that are inconsistent from what the systems integrator or the project manager should be able to say. So the purpose of this conversation is to make sure that we have gotten the proper levels of communication that we need to have as project managers with the customers to make sure that we're just not saying yes to everything. Sometimes saying no is the best option, and when we can't say no, we need to limit our exposure, as Bill had said. So in today's area, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about covering the assets and authentication, open ports and protocols, wireless access to corporate networks, and mobile device security, that unless we clearly have a very good statement of work and a clear understanding of what we can do to minimize our risk and to minimize our exposure, we need to just say no. So in our first slide that we have here, we're talking about defining the requirements per a scope of work from a project management perspective. We have both the user requirements, the functional requirements, and then the software and hardware design specifications. When we're in the process of identifying language that are talking in relationship to what is the customer's expectation, there are a lot of times that even if you perform a site walkthrough, and even Secure Experts has been on a number of pre-conference calls and site surveys where some of the information that's regarding the user requirements, the functional requirements, and the design specifications, when they start talking in areas where they're talking about network servers and IT information products, kind of the IoT of things, there's a certain level of ambiguity that they do not direct to the project manager so that we can incorporate them into our design and our strategies. And before we build from a project management approach, if they don't provide us with the appropriate information to perform and to decide what's known as the installation qualification, which are the acceptable parameters and the sign-offs that not only include the deployment of the physical security product, but the logical configurations such as the firewalls and the intrusion detection systems that are used for identifying whether a cyber breach has occurred, then we need to ask additional qualification questions on those areas. And then when we move into the operational qualifications, how are we able to ensure that from an operational standpoint that the performance metrics and the proper staffing is provided that can appropriately man the project, to staff the project for ongoing work to determine whether there's a technical issue or a problem with configuration. And then we go into the performance qualification to make sure that the operational standards as far as frames per second, events per second, or the amount of transactions meet what are the required objectives. Those are some of the things that from a cybersecurity project management perspective, we need to make sure that we have some clarity on those areas. The other area from a project management standpoint that we've encountered from a project management perspective is that customers who do not provide you with the proper boundary of where their IT assets and where their physical assets are in a definition of a proposal from a project management perspective is really a challenging issue. There are customers who really don't know what they have inside of their own environment, and now when they are asking for systems integrators to perform more IT sophisticated solutions such as the implementation of a video management server or an access control system that needs to connect more than one site, they quite often don't provide you with an appropriate asset inventory or a diagram. We've seen diagrams that we've looked at as far as floor plans and CAD drawings that are not accurate and don't represent the true environment, causing a significant amount of workaround and time to find out and to fish for information that should have readily been provided to us in the course of us implementing a project or making a bid for a project. And there's also areas that we've ran into that even concern when we have an existing piece of equipment that they would prefer for you to install, especially in what they call virtualized environments, where they are using machines that are software-based and that we're adding and loading software onto pre-existing equipment that the systems didn't meet the system characterization as far as the minimum disk space, the amount of CPU, or the amount of RAM storage. We needed to make sure that the disk space and the other kinds of characteristics that go into the system were appropriate even for us to add the appropriate qualifications. And we've run into a lot of problems from that area. And finally, in the area of the boundaries and the assets, is to talk about the patches and the incompatibilities with other systems, that we can reduce our exposure by making sure that we say no to customers who want us to provide interfaces with systems that are foreign to us and that we don't have a true grasp of what that real environment is. So now we're moving on to what we would call the usernames and passwords. As a project manager, quite often we come into an environment where we have to our systems to other systems, and quite often they do not know what their passwords are, how to get into different pieces of equipment, and how to configure their infrastructure so that you can deploy a physical security system. It's very important to have the ability to have an administrator of the company or of your customer to provide you with a temporary account that has the proper levels of access to the systems that are needed to have access to all of the areas inside of the domain that you'll be operating in, and then making sure that at the end of the day that they change that password or to disable that account that they set up, to being able to ensure that the cybersecurity capabilities that they should be maintaining, that they're not leaving an open door for the systems integrator. And this is something that we as systems integrators don't even want as well, is to know the passwords of the systems that we've connected to once we've concluded our project. So another factor in regarding to covering your assets and authentication, kind of CYAA, is that we need to move away from using username and password combinations to using something that can use the process of something you know, something you have, and something you are. And that leads into the areas of using smart cards, or at minimum what's called out-of-band calls, where before logging into the system, it can send you a text message to your phone that you would enter a code to provide you authentication or another mechanism of that. But moving from deploying solutions for our customers where they're only using usernames and passwords increases the liability both from a project management standpoint and a systems integrator approach. So moving to multi-factor authentication has been known as one of the better practices that we can introduce to our customers in being able to move forward. So with that being said, we'd like to move on to the next level of understanding that when we are installing solutions into our customers' environments from a project management perspective, one of the areas that we would think about is when we would connect our system, quite often a project manager did not ask the question, which was very technical, to say, of the software that I am deploying into the customer environment for specific purposes or mission function, what are the least restrictive capabilities that are required for me to install on my product? But then from the customer side, you want to lock the product down so that all of the unnecessary ports and the protocols that are not needed for the system to operate should be shut down or turned off from your system. Most systems are very static once deployed, as to the fact that if we're not adding a lot of new software or making a lot of configuration changes to it, there should be, after we've identified from an access control or a camera or other areas, we know, or we should be able to obtain what are those ports and what are the protocols that those systems need to have open and available to talk to other systems. And from the firewall standpoint, we need to apply the most restrictive controls so that we're blocking any kind of other traffic that's not necessary for the system to be able to provide, which minimizes the exposure to cybersecurity risk during the deployment from a project management perspective. The other area that we wanted to focus in an area about open ports and protocols, is back to the areas of how systems are broken into and how attacks are made against the networks. They use a process which is called brute force password cracking. And when there are open ports and protocols that are available on the server, they provide gateways for someone who is an unauthorized user to start utilizing a set of tools that can be used to attempt to guess the username and password combinations. And I'm sure that we all know about the use of default passwords being the primary area where systems have been breached. And recent attacks, according to some of the camera manufacturers, where the use of a default password was used to launch an attack against another company network, is that we need to be able to ensure that we're using strong passwords when we cannot use multi-factor authentication, and make sure that those systems are being used and kept internal to our own organizations, and that we're able to make those proper recommendations to our customers, and as systems integrators use our own tools to have strong passwords that are resistant to dictionary and brute force password cracking. So as we move along, again, with the open ports and protocols, the tools that are used for cyber exploitation are called port sniffing and discovery tools. They can identify through the use of very non-sophisticated tools whether a specific port is open and available on the network. For example, port 80 is identified by most networks as used for internet access. And what quite often, if the system has not been configured appropriately for being able to accept connections to the internet, then if there was a tool or a port that was open on a network that could be sniffed, there are tools that could be used to try to guess passwords and to try to inject malware into the system. So once again, from a project management approach, we need to clearly ensure that we have an understanding that we are locking down and restricting the use of the ports and the protocols that are being able to be used inside of the system. So finally, there's a tool that we're referring to in the open ports and protocols, and the name of the tool is called Shodan. And Shodan is a tool that we as systems integrators and project managers can have our technical team to review to ensure that we can identify and make sure that there's no exposed IP addresses, ports, or protocols that could be used by an attacker against the networks that we are deploying for our customers or performing systems integrator responsibilities and functions for. And it not only looks at external, what's called public-facing areas for people that are outside of the network, it can also be used as a discovery tool to validate all of the IP addresses that are used inside of an environment. So once we have defined our assets and we've identified the boundaries of what we're performing from a project management approach inside of our customer environments, then this is a tool that we can use. Now we're going to move on to Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is one of the most easily exploitable ways to get into the network. And the reason why is because it does not require a physical connection. The current mechanism for setting up fake hotspots and Wi-Fis to guess or to lure people into typing in their usernames and passwords and thinking that they're typing in information that might be considered to be sensitive, that they have secure connections when they really are not, is one of the next generations of the things that we should say no as far as from a project manager to customer requirement. When they want us to install client Wi-Fi and other systems that are including connections, we need to establish and to ensure that we have trusted connections from wireless devices to make sure that the ability for other individuals that are unauthorized cannot have access or to being able to misuse or to fake the device that we would be installing as part of our customer requirements to anything but a trusted connection. So in doing so, we need to ensure that we understand what's the difference between a legitimate Wi-Fi connection, one that has been proven and had the device ensuring that they trust that particular device, instead of address that they can steal the user credentials and ultimately breach into a customer network. So there are multiple ways of being able to ensure that we are protecting a Wi-Fi connection or wireless connection, but a significant amount of attention needs to be made in deploying and ensuring the security of the devices that are connected to Wi-Fi's and internal customer premises. And if the customers don't have the right infrastructure in place, or you don't have the right design model, this is a perfect example of when we should say no to customer requirements to connect wireless devices to their network. So in the final moment, we're going to just discuss mobile device access, which outside of Wi-Fi is the next most significant trend of where the next phase of where cybersecurity breaches are occurring. Mobile devices, more prevalent than ever, are being used to connect to corporate networks to perform security functions. They want to view cameras on the iPad. They want to be able to view cameras from their mobile devices. And the process of configuring these devices leave a very vulnerable, exploitable gap from a cybersecurity perspective. And mobile device access to corporate networks needs to be very tightly controlled. And one of the best practices that if customers have applications, or if we're proposing or selling applications that are connected to networks that use mobile devices, if they do not tell you, or if you do not provide the requirement and the capability for them to access that system that's done from the mobile phone through using a virtual private network or a VPN, this is again another subject that the project manager should probably say no to those customer requirements. And if we can, there are modules that can be deployed inside of the mobile devices, which are called trusted hardware modules, which are actually chips that support encryption in some kind of devices. It's strongly recommended that we use those kinds of devices when possible, and those equipment, to making sure that our systems are secure when we're promoting and proposing those to our customers. So, in summary, we need to know about our proposals, about our environment, about the assets, and those things that we can before going into projects. And sometimes customers don't know what they don't know. But those things that they don't know can affect your bottom line and the job profitability, as Bill had talked about earlier. He had break-evens, he had high profitable jobs, but I'm sure that there were areas that we as systems integrators ran into those unexpected pitfalls, which caused us to have to spend more resources than necessary to being able to promote. So the other areas that we need to look at is in the changing IoT environments, we need to practice good cyber hygiene to protect not only ourselves, but our customers' environments as well, and that we need to limit our exposure from a liability perspective by being able to say no to customer requirements. Just because they say that this is something that they want is not always something that we, as project managers and systems integrators, should give. That ends the summary of the presentation, and we're open for questions and comments if available.
Thanks, Darnell. We did have a couple questions from the audience that came in. The first one is, what can security contractors do or install on their laptops to reduce the risk of potentially harmful viruses being transferred inadvertently to a customer's network when a technician or engineer is required to connect to their networks in order to complete the work?
Right. So the first thing is that the primary way that viruses and having a good antivirus program is very important to have on our system. But the other point that's very important is that a significant amount of malware is transferred by the use of USB drives and USB devices. There are devices that can operate, and we can go into more specifics, but they're biometric thumb drives that if you lose or if one is stolen, then they're password protected as well as biometrically protected to make sure that those files can be trusted and not only protect the sensitivity of the files, but they also have a mode which is called read-only mode, which makes it so that as a systems integrator, we're not transferring our viruses or our connections to our customer computer and vice versa, because we would very seldomly know that a customer environment was to have malware or something that could then be used where we would copy a file or it would get copied to our USB, and then we would then reverse by going back and to infect our own customer environment. So from a remote access perspective, one of the things that we would usually provide as a recommendation and an approach for connecting to our customers' networks for remote support is not to use GoToMeeting or WebEx or any of the other standard protocols that are available. It is to set up a virtual private network connection directly from your location into your customer's environment, and more so over that from an audit standpoint, the systems integrators, technicians should log into a central location inside of their environment to connect to their customers directly. In other words, they should not be supporting a customer environment from a laptop that they're connecting from Starbucks, running GoToMeeting or WebEx to try to do remote support into their customer's environment.
Okay. Thank you, Darnell. We have another question submitted from the audience. It says, Darnell, IT vulnerabilities are commonly exposed and distributed throughout the community for correction. Is this being done anywhere in the physical security industry or by any manufacturers we commonly use?
Yes, there's one called the National Vulnerability Database, and it's called nvd.gov. It's on the public web. What they're talking about is it's a vulnerability database, and now they've started adding physical security information as well. For example, one of the most recent camera manufacturers who suffered a breach, the advisory and the notification was actually published on this database as well. There has not been as large of an adoption of physical security products into the common vulnerabilities and exposures database that we're talking about, but that's changing as the Internet of Things starts becoming more prevalent. One of the things and the reasons, which is a sad state of affairs, is that we've identified that some physical security manufacturers are very reluctant to publish their information out on the network or to be published to an authoritative source because they really don't have the proper means to assert that their products are free of the cybersecurity vulnerabilities that would be really unacceptable in a logical environment.
Okay. And the final question we have is, rather than say no, can an integrator just get a contract that indemnifies the integrator from a cyber breach related to products deployed by the integrator?
That's exactly what we were leading to. We're talking about reducing liability, and I think knowing when to say no is just basically a generalization to say that without compensating controls, as we talk about, without having a way to offset something that might not be in place, we just wanted to use the statement that let's just not say yes to everything. Let's evaluate and make sure that we have a thorough level of understanding of what are we getting into. So I do agree that the cyber contract and the liability language is very important to put in, and that saying no really should be used as the last resort when you're not able to achieve a reasonable framework to protect yourself against exposure.
And Darnell, just to confirm for those who submitted a question here regarding the Shodan tool, how and where do they access that?
It's at shodan.net, www.shodan.net. And if you were to Google the word Shodan, it will likely bring you to those tools.
Okay, great. Well, Darnell, we really appreciate your time. Thank you. For the project managers on the line, we do encourage you to continue participating in Project Management Appreciation Month. Next week, we're actually focusing on technician skill sets, how you as project managers can assess the skills of your technicians. And for those technicians looking to move into a project manager position, we outline a career path for you. So definitely stay tuned for that information. And again, we'll be having different events all week. So check your inbox for our weekly newsletter. Thank you, everyone, for your time. And Darnell, again, we appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much.